Hi everybody, my name is Sam. I'm the writing consultant at the Donito Career Center for the Steve Hicks School of Social Work, and today's workshop video is about APA. This is a brief presentation intended to capture a few facets of APA and how to use it. First, I'll go into a brief history of what APA even is. We'll talk a little bit about APA as an academic gatekeeper. This is an idea that is in circulation somewhat often when we talk about citation languages. We'll then segue into why citation languages matter. What can we get out of them? How do they help us? Talk a little bit about citation machines. We'll briefly cover some best practices for crafting the reference page or the works cited page if you're used to MLA using APA. And then cover a few very basic rules to get you started, some things that you may not expect if you're switching into APA out of another citation language, or if you're using APA for the first time, that are actually part of doing it correctly. So what is APA? APA stands for American Psychological Association. It's what we call a citation language. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as a style guide. Either way, this means that it's a code for doing research according to a discipline, or sometimes, as is the case with APA, a group of disciplines. It's been around a really long time. We've had it since 1929, although as those of you who have been using APA for a while know, we've been through a lot of different editions. We are currently on edition number 7, which means that some of the rules stay pretty similar and many of them change over time. APA is the citation language for social work because it's also the citation language for most of the major behavioral and social science disciplines like psychology, anthropology, education, political science, communication, and business. Which, if you think about it, is pretty cool because it means that as you, as a social worker, cross into those disciplines and interact with other researchers, scholars, and professionals in those disciplines, you're going to share a common understanding of how to cite things, how things should be formatted on the page, and other best practices that will be common across those disciplinary divides. This is really nice because it means that your research, as it crosses into those other fields, can be more easily collaborative and more accessible to people outside of your specific social work field. The problem that many people cite, not just with APA, but with citation languages generally, is that they often depend upon a variety of arbitrary or seemingly arbitrary rules that make it difficult for people who do not have that background in APA to move forward in the university or to be taken seriously. So it's very important to note that citation language proficiency, your ability to format something according to APA or MLA or Chicago style, is not the same thing as good writing. It is not the same thing as good argumentation. You can construct a really compelling argument, you can create a really compelling piece of writing and not have it be APA correct, but still have produced a really compelling piece of writing. When we talk about American English grammar or any grammar system, we similarly have to be wary of the idea that something that isn't grammatical, according again to that system of arbitrary rules, is not good writing, or that the person who produced the document is not a good writer. This can further the gatekeeping that citation languages can produce for students who don't have APA or citation language proficiency, but are perfectly capable of learning and at a different stage in the process of writing, or writing differently, right? It doesn't have to be vertical. The thing about using APA, and the reason that learning how to use APA is still helpful, is because it's valued by journals and it's valued by other scholarly outlets that employ an editorial board to make sure that everything they produce is consistent, that it's quote-unquote correct, and that it is carefully cited and proofread. So if we learn how to produce something in APA, in a way, we learn how to play the game, right? We learn how to make sure that our research, which is important, crucial, urgent, is taken seriously by those journals. And we also learn how to read with an awareness of which sites, which journals, which sources are carefully edited and which aren't. Because more often than not, the ones that are carefully produced are the ones that depend on APA and do it by the book. Here are a few other things that are handy about citing, whether you're using APA or another language. Collaboration is a good thing. When we cite something, and I talk about this briefly in the Academic Honesty Workshop, we are giving ourselves permission to collaborate and think with others. We are making it clear that the work that we're producing is the product of our readership and of our ability to think along with others and to integrate others' thoughts into our thoughts and into our research. This is a nice thing if you think of it that way, right? That we're not doing this work alone. It is necessarily collaborative. This is also, again, a means of showcasing our experience and care as writers. If we are fluent in APA, we are proving that we have done our homework, that we understand the language used by the journals that we hope will give our work an audience. APA can also help readability. If we all understand and work in APA, then we have an expectation for how information will be laid out on the page, and we don't get stuck on a nuance or a rule that might be employed by another citation language or outside of citation languages generally, and that might make us scratch our heads while we're trying to pay attention to the content of what we're reading and not get stymied by the format. And then the last thing is that, again, a APA compliant piece of writing is usually proof that it's been edited or peer-reviewed, so credibility becomes an issue here too. Many people who use APA or begin using APA think, okay, no problem, I will make my basic reference list and then I will feed everything through a citation machine. This is a particularly tricky trap not to fall into because many reputable websites that contain guides for how to use APA also pilot and advertise citation machines. So here is my warning regarding citation machines. Yes, they are very easy and very convenient, but most professors will be able to tell if you've used a citation machine because they are not always 100% accurate. Even the citation machines that are created by websites that are reputable and have a lot of good resources related to APA. So my advice is just not to use them, or if you are going to use them, make sure that you double check your work following the citation machine producing those citations. One thing to think about is that if you are just doing everything manually, it makes it easier to get the hang of APA sooner and to do it on your own in the same way we pick up other practices while we're writing, right? Spelling, grammar, all of these things that we learn how to do without assistance at a certain point. It's easier to learn the ins and outs of APA the more you practice. So I'm going to take a brief trip with you to the place where I go if I have questions about APA. This is called the Purdue Online Writing Lab. This is the website that I think is most reliable and most comprehensive if you have questions about how to cite something in APA. If you look at this left-hand bookmarks bar, you'll see a huge list of source types that you can click on, and the guide will tell you exactly how the citation should appear on the page in your reference list at the end of a paper. It'll give you lots of different examples. You can see here that this page about how to cite books also goes into what happens if you have an edited book, for example, but there's no clear author. What happens if you have a book with many authors, right? Common problem for us researchers. If you are working with a translator, a translation, and you want to cite the translator, if there are multiple editions, if you're working with an article or a chapter of a book, but you don't want to cite the whole book, goes on, etc., right? There are a lot of scenarios that come up that present these citation challenges. You can see here that if you have unconventional sources, there's also a handy guide for that. So let's say you conduct an interview. This will teach you how to cite an interview. Here's a presentation without an online source reference guide. Here's what you do if you have an unpublished work or an unpublished manuscript that you need to cite. And you can imagine that if you go through the rest of these text pages, you'll find additional guides for a huge variety of source types, which is why I like this website. You'll also find an overview of how to use APA, what APA is, how to format a paper from beginning to end, how to use headers, what the title page should look like, and a variety of other tips and tricks. You can usually get to Purdue OWL by Googling a question directly. Say you're having trouble finding it on this bookmarks bar and you want how to cite a book. Okay. EasyBib will come up. All these other sites will come up. But if you type how to cite a book, Purdue OWL, you get right back to that page. So it's very Google handy as well. Here are some other rules related to APA that are a little less intuitive and that can be useful just to keep in mind while you're writing so that you don't have to worry too much when you go back and edit. Did I miss something? Is it APA appropriate? How do I make sure that I met all of the guidelines that I need to meet in order for this to be APA compliant? And many of these things, I'll be honest, I Googled and double checked because there's always something that surprises me. So this is helpful for me as well to compose this list for you. One thing that some people don't realize is that according to APA, you can use any accessible font. It does not have to be Times New Roman. This, of course, will change depending on the preferences of your instructor if you're writing a paper for a class. But if you want it to be APA compliant generally, it only needs to be readable, and I'll add transferable between computers. So you don't want to use a font that you've downloaded, for example, even if it looks nice. According to APA, you need to double space what you type, unless, again, your instructor has other guidelines. You want to use only one space after each period. If you're like me, you grew up with parents who taught you to double space after each period. And after working in the publishing industry, I actually found out that the reason for this is because when people were working with typewriters, they wanted that double space in order to maintain more consistent and pleasing formatting. But periods now on computers are actually formatted such that there's a little extra space. Each time you use one, the computer does it for you, so you don't need to do it manually. You want to keep all of your margins at 1 inch around each page, even if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm on the very last page of the document, it's going to go one line onto the next document, I better increase my margins. It is not APA compliant to have margins that are any other size except 1 inch all around. APA says that you need to use Oxford commas. An Oxford comma is an additional comma if you have a string of 3 items in a line that precedes the and. So if you don't use an Oxford comma, you might be used to hearing that you can say something like, for example, we bought apples, oranges, and peaches, and you only need 1 comma between apples and oranges. But if you're using an Oxford comma, you actually maintain that comma after oranges and before the and to make it abundantly clear that each of these 3 items are separate. You want to double space block quotes. This means that if you have a long quote in the middle of a page, in MLA, you actually use single spacing to create a more condensed block on the page, right? But in APA, as of edition 7, you're supposed to double space that block quote in the same way that you double space everything else on the document. You want to use words to express numbers 0 through 9 and use numerals for anything 10 and over. You also, this is one that I learned recently, want to use words to express any number at the beginning of a sentence. You don't want to use periods between letters in an abbreviation. For example, you would write USA without periods in between each letter instead of U period S period A period, right? This is another difference from MLA if you're used to that language. And you want to capitalize proper nouns, but not terms associated with those nouns. This can get a little tricky sometimes, raise questions. Here's a good example. You want to capitalize University of Texas because that is the title of the university, but that doesn't mean that if you're referring to university in the general sense as a concept, you are going to capitalize that word. That is the end of today's brief presentation, but if you have any questions at all about the content in this presentation, please feel free to reach out. I love working with other graduate students. This is my email, and this is the email address of the Donito Career Center generally, if we can help you make appointments, or if you have any other questions logistically about how to use our center. Thank you so much for watching.